Pat Harris is a true progressive who is running for the U.S. Senate to fight establishment politics in Washington. For the past 24 years, he has been working as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney. Pat believes as a nation dedicated to the rule of law, everyone deserves the right to a fair trial, and that our very freedom is built on the foundation of the justice system. Mr. Harris is running on a grassroots campaign funded by the people because he believes that a true democracy cannot run on campaigns funded by corporations. He is passionate about supporting a Medicare for all healthcare system for all citizens, and he supports common sense gun reform legislation. As U.S. Senator, he will continue to fight corporations. Pat is progressive, he is aggressive, and he wins. Mr. Harris, thank you for finding time in your busy schedule to meet with us, and thank you for inviting us into your beautiful home for this interview.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's really great to have you here.
Mr. Harris, you've said in the past that you would try to keep corporate money out of politics. How do you plan to do that?
Well, first, we have to recognize that the problem with the entire system has to do with corporations are essentially running our country. Corporate donations are what, it's very clear in Washington, it's pay to play. And corporations are what's driving the system. We no longer feel like we're represented. People don't feel like they're represented. Most people don't feel like they have a voice anymore. That's what this campaign has been about, has been giving people a voice. The way to do it, the best way to get campaign money out of the election system, we need to go to public financing of elections. A lot of countries actually finance their elections, and what that does is it allows people who aren't necessarily millionaires or can't self-fund or people who can't get the corporate donations. It allows people like teachers, nurses, police officers, people like that to run for office. Those are voices that are not being heard, and I think it's critical if we're going to really be a democracy, if we're going to be what we claim to be, a country by the people, for the people, we've got to get money out and let people like that get into office and have a voice.
Give them the opportunity.
Absolutely, because right now, if you don't have several $1 million or you don't have access to corporations, you can't run for office. There's a lot of good people out there. In fact, I can tell you a woman who was running for Congress, a nurse, very, very wonderful woman, great plans, great ideas, great energy. She had to drop out of the campaign just because she couldn't afford to stay in. And we're losing people like that, and that's just not right.
What makes single-payer system more effective than what we have in place right now?
Well, what we have in place is essentially insurance companies, and we all know that insurance companies have to make a profit. That's what they're there for. They are there for their shareholders in order to make a profit. We have insurance companies that are essentially running our healthcare system. We find in talking to doctors and talking to nurses, they spend so much of their time every single day filling out paperwork for the insurance companies. That's time spent away from their patients and what they do best and what they want to do. What we've got to do and what a single payer system will do, it takes it away from the insurance companies. It is not, as some people claim, a government takeover. This is not a situation where doctors will be paid by the government or hospitals will be taken over by the government. They'll still be in private practice. You'll be able to choose what doctor you wish to have. But it will lessen the burden on them in terms of what they have to do to provide for the insurance companies, the paperwork, the bureaucracy. It will lessen it dramatically. That's going to be one huge advantage. But a second huge advantage of single payer, you're now covering everyone. You're now covering every single person. When it's called Medicare for all, it genuinely is for all. So no one in this country needs to become bankrupt over healthcare costs or worse, die because of a lack of health care. I can tell you a story about a woman. A nurse told me a story. She said a woman came into her office. She was bleeding profusely. And they put her on the table, and they were talking to her, and they asked her, why didn't you come in earlier? And she said, well, I haven't been to a doctor in 10 years, and I just can't afford. It takes about $20 for the cab ride. I have to get $25 for child care, and the doctor himself costs $50, $75 just for a pap smear. I can't afford that. She died. She actually died on the table there because of $75 to $100 that she couldn't afford. Medicare for all would allow people like that to get the health care they need. Thirdly, and this is one of the big things that's not discussed a lot in single payer, single payer focuses in all these countries on preventive care. It's important, if you're going to keep costs down, to make sure people don't get sick in the first place. You're not just treating them once they've gotten sick, you're keeping them from trying to get sick.
Exactly.
And it's wonderful in terms of these countries. You see, for example, my wife is Canadian. She grew up with the Canadian healthcare system. They provide so many things that keep you, allow you continual trips to the doctor, checkups. They allow you in terms of health tips and everything from dietary tips, things like that, to keep you from getting sick, and it keeps healthcare costs down. It's a wonderful system.
Same goes for France and I think
Absolutely.
England.
Just about every civilized country in this world pretty much has some form of single payer healthcare.
So hopefully we'll get there.
Hopefully we're going to get there. We're going to join these countries, I hope.
Modernizing education and improving high schools has been one of your main issues. What are your intentions?
It is one of my main issues, and it's because my mother was a school teacher. For 35 years, she taught 8th grade history. I tell people that what they first have to understand about the educational system, teachers have opportunities to do other things. They're bright, intelligent people. They can take other jobs. They teach because of the love of teaching, because they love what they do. Everyone has stories and can tell stories about a teacher that's changed their lives. Everyone can also tell stories about a bad teacher. So what happens is we hear criticisms and say, well, teachers are mostly not good, or we need to be teaching more about test scores. What we need to be doing is letting the teachers teach, getting them away from these test scores and this constant idea that we have to tell the students they have to make a score in order to improve, in order to advance. Let the teachers teach. Secondly, we have to recognize this generation, and it's hard for me to understand, and it's certainly hard for people even older than me to understand. This generation is growing up in an age that we can't fathom because of technology, because of computerization, and what is essentially going to be the future in this country. We're going to have things like artificial intelligence. Well, we already do. We're going to have incredible opportunities, but they're not opportunities that schools teach. They're not the things that we've dealt with for the last 100 years. It's not, for example, even vocational schools. You see that they're still teaching things that are going to be, unfortunately, in 10 to 15 years, they're not going to exist any longer. We have to modernize the schools and realize the future is in technology. We can take things like coding and teach it in high school. Let students learn it early on, because that's going to be something that right now in this environment, coders, young men and women with a high school degree who know how to code, can start off at a job at $75,000 to $90,000 a year. Those are good paying jobs, and you don't even have to have a college education for it. Those are the kind of things we're going to have to teach in college. We're going to, teach in high school. We're going to have to revolutionize our entire educational system toward getting to the future, and things like artificial intelligence, things like the technology that's coming for, we're going to be dealing, people say, well, we're going to lose jobs with driverless cars because you're going to lose Uber or you're going to lose truck driving jobs. But the truth of the matter is, we may lose those specific jobs, but other jobs will be created by it. We also have jobs in the environment that are coming up that are going to be huge in the next 20 to 30 years as we battle climate change. These again are things we need to be working with our students on and teaching them, training them on. That's the future, and that's the direction we have to go in education, I believe.
Would you agree that science and technology innovation is the new trend in America?
Arsha, I'm so glad you asked me that question, because that's a huge point in my campaign. I talk about the fact that this country was founded on innovation. It was founded on imagination. We are the country that not only created so many of the technological advances over the years, over the centuries. We're the country that put a man on the moon. We're the country that was looked to by the rest of the world as a scientific leader, as a technology leader. We brought scientists from all over the world, wanted to come here and live here and study here. Unfortunately, in the last 30 to 40 years, the United States has cut back on funding scientists, on technology, and unfortunately a lot of that money has gone to the Defense Department for weapons, for even things, rockets and things that don't even work, that are never going to be used. We have a bloated defense budget, and at the same time, we're cutting back on the things that actually made this country the amazing place that it is. We're cutting back on medical research at a time when we are close. We're very close to solving Alzheimer's disease. The Alzheimer's Foundation last year asked the Senate for $5 billion because they feel like they're close for their research. The Senate gave them, I think it was $1.5 or $2 billion instead. At the same time, the Senate voted the Defense Department about a 500, it was just above what even President Trump asked for. $50 billion more than what President Trump even asked for. Those billions of dollars sound, I guess, in a lot of ways for people, it just sounds almost like play toys or play cash, monopoly money. It could have a real effect. It could have a real effect. You put that money into scientific technology. You put it into medical research. You put it into innovative ideas. This country definitely have the incredible manpower. We have the initiative. Capitalism is a system that's based on people with ideas and trying things. We just have to help fund them. And we need to quit saying that we're going to spend every available dollar we have on defense and realize the defense of this country includes helping to take care of our citizens, helping them solve problems like Alzheimer's, like heart disease, helping on climate change and dealing with the issues that we're dealing with in the environment. Those are defense issues too. And that's where I believe the money ought to go. So I'm very glad you asked me that question.
How can we convince the climate change deniers to come around and support renewable energy?
Well, I think it comes down to the thing it always comes down to in this country, money. So many things that we can do with the environment, so many things, renewable energy things that we should be moving toward, actually can turn a profit. They can be actually very, very profitable businesses. I tell people a lot of times when I go to Fresno, when I go to the Central Valley and I talk to farmers, if you talk about climate change or you talk about what's happening with the environment, there's a lack of interest. There's something that a lot of them don't believe. They hear it from Fox News that it doesn't exist. You start telling them, you know something, let me talk to you about regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is the ability to actually use methods to take the carbon from the environment back into the soil, and it actually increases the soil's ability to hold water so that in periods of droughts, it actually helps them a great deal because they can last longer. It increases crop production. It increases the bottom line, which is their profits. You talk to them about that, now they're interested. Now they want to talk about what it is they can do. This is a method, regenerative agriculture is a method, it's an example of how we can convince people who are, in many ways, we may never convince them about global warming and about climate change, but we can convince them that if they'll go along with these ideas, it's good for them. It makes a great profit for them. I think Al Gore had his second movie, and he talked about a town in Texas where it was a Republican mayor, Republican city council, people who didn't necessarily believe in climate change, but they become 100% renewable. The entire town is now 100% renewable, and they figured it out because economically they were saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. It's just smart business, and if you've got people who just are not going to buy or not believe that climate change exists, hit them in the pocketbook.
Mr. Harris, in the past you've been to Armenia twice, if I'm not mistaken. What binds you with the Armenian community?
My relationship with the Armenian community began back in 1994 when I came to Los Angeles and I began to work at a law firm with a lot of Armenian clients, a lot of Armenian lawyers there. I worked for a famous Armenian lawyer named Mark Garrigus. So I got introduced to the Armenian community. And the thing that struck me early on, being part of the Armenian community was like being part of a family. instantly with people that we were dealing with. Come on over for dinner, let's go have a drink, let's go sit down, let's talk. There was a warmth and a camaraderie just immediately that I felt with the Armenian community. I think it's very funny because I grew up in the South. I grew up in Arkansas. And there's that same sort of feeling. You know, Southerners tend to be very warm and come sit in the porch and talk, and I got that with the Armenian community, and I think that's why I connected so well with them. After a few years of being there, I had the opportunity, my first opportunity, to go on a humanitarian aid trip to Armenia. And it again, when I got there, that same feeling, the warmth, I can recall it was almost like you couldn't spend 10 minutes without somebody wanting to talk to you about how proud they were of Armenia. And they wanted to talk about how beautiful the country was and the wonderful things. And there was just there was such a feeling of pride and such a feeling of just, it was just overwhelming in so many ways. But what really was amazing to me is I had a second opportunity to go back to Armenia, and that was 2 years ago. So it's been very recent. I had a chance to go there working on a case. I have to tell you the difference was amazing. It was about 12 years apart. Yerevan looks very much, at night especially, like Barcelona. It looks like pretty much any European city. It's just gorgeous. The lights, the way they've set up the fountains, the beauty of the buildings, the architecture. I just fell in love with it all over again. I came home and told my wife, I said, you know, the next time we take a vacation, a European vacation, we're going to go back to Yerevan. I got to show you this. It's amazing. I've always felt the warmth, but beyond that, there's just this sense of history and this sense of a people of pride, and I love that. And I always enjoyed working on the cases. I worked for a while on the New York life insurance case, the settlement, the genocide settlement case. And I got to learn a lot about the history of the genocide. And to this day, I still find myself getting really angry and upset when I hear about genocide deniers. I had to sit in a courtroom one time, one of the hardest experiences I ever had, in a courtroom in Cleveland, where the judge allowed a genocide denier to get up in the court and give a speech. In that courtroom were at least 10 people in their 90s, one was 101, who had lived through the genocide, and had to sit there and watch somebody tell them, your whole life's a lie. It was disgusting. It's one of the most disgusting experiences of my lifetime. So my connection with the Armenian community, I think it's based on my Southern roots, but it's also based on just the love of the people.
When can we expect to see progress on equal pay?
I think one of the things that I have noticed the most is I've been out campaigning. I've been all over the state, been to numerous functions and dinners and different things. One of the things that I've noticed repeatedly is hear politicians get up, and it's a great applause line. What we need is equal pay for women. And they get huge applause, and then they walk off, and that's it. And it dawned on me as I've listened to this, where have I heard this before? And I started thinking, you know, I've heard this since 1978. We've been talking about this since the late 1970s, and nobody ever does anything about it. It's just an applause line. It's just talk. We put together what is essentially a 4-point plan so that women will be able to get equal pay. It starts off with the fact you have to take the agency, the government agency that deals with inequities, and we have to fund it at a higher level. Secondly, every company with more than 100 employees has to provide transparency in terms of salary structure. If, for example, a man and a woman in the same position are paid, the man's paid more or dramatically more, then they have to provide an answer as to why. Perhaps they have a reason. Perhaps the man's been there 20 years, the woman's only been there 3. They can give an explanation. But if there's no explanation, and this continues, the company is levied with fines. They come back 5 years later. If it hasn't improved, the company is then, the U.S. attorney comes in and files what is essentially a civil case in federal court against the company, which is then notified. Wall Street is notified. Everyone is notified that this company is a company that does not pay what they should be paying. They do not pay fairly. And they are fined even more heavily, and they have the opportunity, at this point, the government has the opportunity to levy severe, severe sanctions on them. At that point, the company then has the ability, or has the choice, of either essentially making sure that women and men are equally paid, or paying what would in many cases be fines that might even put them out of business. So obviously they're going to choose to make sure the pay is equal. It's a system that we've been talking about for several months. It's a system that when we first mentioned it or talked about it, people said, well, is that doable? Interestingly enough, about 6 weeks ago, the country of Iceland implemented almost that exact program. And it's working very, very well there. They're finding that, in essence, companies will cooperate with the government, will have transparency, because they would rather do that than develop a reputation or be sanctioned for being what is essentially sexist. No one wants to be put with that label. So you do find that they found in Iceland already, companies are coming to the table, and we're seeing salaries, women's salaries become equal with men. That's the kind of plan we have to have. We have to have actual action versus, like I said, using it as an applause line.
And finally, housing crisis. What do you have on your agenda?
Well, Arsha, I think there's two major things we have to discuss when we talk about the housing issue. One issue is obviously homelessness itself, people who don't have a home. The second thing is affordable housing for those who do have an income, who are not homeless, but need to try and find affordable housing. The first issue, homelessness, is something that frustrates me to no end because it's a difficult problem to begin with. But to their credit, the city of Los Angeles, the state of California, they have put billions of dollars toward updating current shelters, expanding current shelters, and building new shelters, also trying to take money and help with the issue of mental illness, mental health, which is a cause of much of homelessness. Unfortunately, because of bureaucracy, almost none of the money is being spent. It's amazing that billions of dollars are sitting there to actually help solve the homeless problem, and we watch it grow and grow and grow. We watch it grow. We think of it in Los Angeles, obviously. We think of it when we go to visit San Francisco and see the homeless. What we're finding as we go around the state, it's a developing problem in small towns like Chico, Redding. You see places like that where the population may only be 50 or 60,000. They're developing a huge homeless problem. There's a town up north called Weaverville. 6,000 people, they have a homeless problem. We've got the money to at least get started on it, and yet bureaucracy is holding it up. We've got to get that money released. We've got to get the money out into the system. We've got to build homeless shelters. We've got to expand the ones we've got. That would at least start us on the right road. Now, as far as the second part of it, affordable housing for those people who are having trouble finding it, going into places like Los Angeles or San Francisco, a starter home can be anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million to over that for something small, maybe 1,200 square feet. That's not something a young couple starting off can afford. What we have to do is we have to deal with issues of affordable housing within urban areas, near transit centers, because if you put them near transit centers, what you're doing is you're not only helping the environment, but you're putting it so that their costs are down in terms of their own transportation. It allows them to cut costs in that way, which can help them in turn make a housing payment. We need to focus on putting housing there, but we also need to do this. We have so many communities that are within 30 minutes, an hour of our centers of LA and San Francisco, our work centers. We need to provide transportation that is something that is actually cheap, something that's accessible, something that allows people, for example, to get on a train maybe they have to be at work at 9 o'clock in the morning. They can get on a train at 7:45 or 8 o'clock, and they can be at work by 9. They can work on the train, read a newspaper, relax. It's something that allows them to live further outside the city in a more affordable housing situation, and at the same time, it also eases the overcrowding in cities. Those areas need to have their transportation built up because that helps solve the housing problem as well. So I think those are some of the things we need to do. Housing in this state is going to continue to be a problem if we continue to essentially not deal with it. We just and I think one of the wonderful things about this state is companies that come in and bring thousands of good paying jobs. But if we allow them to be the only ones who can afford housing in these cities, then the cities are going to be pretty much, you're going to find that people with normal incomes just can't live there, period.
Mr. Harris, is there a message for our viewers?
Well, for me, the message is this. This country has always been about working men and women, about small business. It's always been about those who are willing to try things, to be innovative. I think both political parties have gotten away from that. Both political parties decided that the way to get elected was to take corporate money, to go to Wall Street, to get the large oil companies, pharmaceutical companies, get those kind of companies to donate to them, get huge amounts of corporate donations, and win re-election. In doing so, they got away from the roots of what this country is all about. We need to go back to helping working men and women, to go back to helping small business. I talk about a lot in my speeches that I'm a Democrat. I don't support Donald Trump, but I get upset the Democratic Party wants to become the party of nothing more than criticizing Donald Trump. That's not an agenda. That's not an agenda for the future. The future agenda needs to be about how are we going to make sure that people don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs. In my speeches, I tell people, you drive down the freeway tonight. You look to your car on your left, you look to your car on your right. I think it's a good bet that nobody in that car is sitting there worrying about the Russia investigation or Stormy Daniels or whatever the latest controversy du jour is. They're worried about, am I going to be able to pay back a student loan? Am I going to have to take a 3rd job? How am I going to put my kids through college? Those are the things that people worry about on a day-to-day basis, and we're not addressing it. And it's got nothing to do with party, Democrat, Republican. It's got to do with going back to the very values of working people versus huge corporations, and who are we going to represent? And my whole platform has been, I want to help working people in small business. That's who I want to represent.
Thank you and good luck, Mr. Harris.
Thank you so much for doing it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Pat Harris is a true progressive who is running for the U.S. Senate to fight establishment politics in Washington. For the past 24 years, he has been working as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney. Pat believes as a nation dedicated to the rule of law, everyone deserves the right to a fair trial, and that our very freedom is built on the foundation of the justice system. Mr. Harris is running on a grassroots campaign funded by the people because he believes that a true democracy cannot run on campaigns funded by corporations. He is passionate about supporting a Medicare for all healthcare system for all citizens, and he supports common sense gun reform legislation. As U.S. Senator, he will continue to fight corporations. Pat is progressive, he is aggressive, and he wins.